With a warm smile, Eiji Tsuburaya orchestrated all kinds of motion picture catastrophes, world wars, invasions of monsters, intergalactic battles, and nuclear conflagrations, with the father of tokusatsu and special effects creating all sorts of worldwide phenomenons like Godzilla and Rodan. His earlier works generally being very dark and serious, like Gojira in 1954, to give an impression of the peril and tragedy of an atomic bomb which had only happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki around 10 years before. Tsuburaya would eventually build experience and imagination over the years, leading to a show in the mid-1960s that would unknowingly spark a franchise beloved to this day and a pop culture icon. That show being called Ultra Q. Starting in April 1965, Ultra Q was a black and white show centered around hard science fictional stories, and from time to time featuring appearances of kaiju, their role depending on the plot obviously. With Ultra Q there was no giant alien saviours, with it being left for the police to deal with, or an occasional powerful weapon of science. It was supposedly an intelligent and well-made show, as I haven't seen it myself. However, with the support of the American TBS, which translated it for American viewers, they started demanding more action and special effects, with more child-friendly plots. Despite this, in my opinion, unfortunate change, it did give a much more success for the show, and inspired Tsuburaya, who approved all phases of story development, teleplay writing, and production design to create his most popular work of all time. With the final episode of Ultra Q never releasing, as it had no monsters, Tsuburaya began planning his next show, designing it to be much more child-friendly and giving it an opportunity to unleash his talents of special effects, and adding at least one monster per episode, with even some returning monsters from Ultra Q, like Ragon and Pigman, despite being named Garamon in Ultra Q. He ultimately decided to add a hero to the series, to which everyone's heart could look up to, designing him as a referential patriot of Japan, having somewhat suffered a deal of dignity of the consequences of World War II, giving not only the hero, but the human characters as well, an impression of hope and good nature to inspire the younger generation, with the hero's primary colours being red and silver, possibly to symbolise the Japanese flag, but with silver apparently to symbolise a rocket ship, and the red to represent patterns on the surface of Mars. The most horrendous effort to come up with, though, was the face. Tsuburaya thought the early sketches of the hero were too alien and sinister, and asked production designer Toll Narita to continue drafting, even as teleplays were already being written. So he put his mind and soul together for the final and main touches of the hero. He tried great variation by looking to the classical art of Greece, ancient Egypt, and even the European Renaissance, but could not find anything that perfectly matched his vision of the ordinary and harmony of the universe. He tried to imagine what a vastly intelligent and benevolent race of cosmic travelers would look like, combining the spirit of Zen and Musashi with the placid countenance of a statue of the Buddhist Bodhisattva of compassion. Narita found the perfect incarnation he had been searching for, reflecting a sense of absolute order and harmony as they emerged from their spaceships, ancient smiles, archaic smiles. And Ultraman was born, immediately grabbing worldwide attention and inspiring viewers of various ages worldwide. with it still being a science fiction mystery show, but with dumbed-down themes to prove more suitable for all the family. The effects of this show being outstanding by a 1960s show in colour, but by today's standards they may seem pretty cheesy and wacky, making the show one hell of a nostalgia bomb, proving to be a lot more light-hearted than Ultra Q, with the inclusion of child actors, with even one kid called Hoshino being a main member of the cast, each episode featuring a new or returning kaiju or seijin, with even some returning actors from Ultra Q. The show centers around this monster extermination force called the Science Specialist Search Party, or Science Patrol if you go by the English dub. I personally just like to call them the Triple SP. This orange-wearing organisation works with a vast range of science-fictional vehicles, weapons and advanced technology to deal with any world threats or unusual disturbances, with this group giving the show a futuristic vibe, given that in episode 23, the newly placed memorial of Jamila reads his date of death in 1993, giving a hint that this show was set almost 30 years into the future. The Science Patrol vehicle effects, especially the jet planes being flown on wires, just gave an impression of how badly this show has dated, but it just adds nostalgia to it, and works fine if you use your imagination. The plot of Ultraman is fairly simple, and doesn't really expand beyond the first episode, except give some character development. One day, Science Patrol member Hayata, the main character of this show, is patrolling in a Hawk jet, only to be crashed into and killed by an extraterrestrial spaceship. This ship, belonging to an extraterrestrial named Ultraman, an alien from the nebula M78 who was pursuing the radioactive space beast Bemula, only to accidentally crash into Hayata. Feeling guilt for what he has done, Ultraman revives Hayata at the expense of Ultraman fusing with him, as he can't survive in the Earth's atmosphere for longer than 3 minutes, and gives him a beta capsule, to which Hayata can unleash his alien half should anything disastrous occur on Earth. So two beings fused together to form one superior savior, basically the predecessor to Steven Universe's Gem fusion. So, with the best remembered and symbolized parts of the show being the fight scenes with Ultraman and his opponent, how good are they in terms of the show's limitations in time and budget, and how well do they compare to today's standards? Let's just say you won't be surprised, as there's only so much action a 1960s show with two guys in rubber suits can pull off. So yeah, the fight scenes from the original Ultraman mostly kind of sucked, but they were still damn entertaining and memorable, with some obviously being better than others, with the quality of the fights increasing the further into the show, given the increase in budget, as the fight scenes from around the first 13 episodes being complete and utter awkward bobbins. I personally think this, as these actors were just set loose on the set and could fight however they wanted, unless there was a specific maneuver the crew team wanted to pull off. The dreadful quality of the first Ultraman suit, with any reasonable person who has seen the original series would notice there being 3 Ultraman suits used in total throughout the series. The first suit looking more organic than the other more robotic designs, but with that said, I just hate the original suit. The facial features just look messy, and I find the open mouth a little uncomfortable to look at. The costume also just feels paper thin at times, given by how skin tight it was, and it just doesn't seem pretty to look at, with the thick head and thin suit just making the costume look messy and unrealistic. The second suit giving a much better designed face, making it seem more robotic, with a much less messy looking mouth, and a much more muscular looking suit, making it much more badass and realistic, even giving it a more metallic vibe. The third and final one being the one still used for the original Ultraman today, giving the finishing touches to the design of Ultraman, including a much broader mouth. So, which do I prefer? Well, as I heavily dislike the first, it's gonna have to be between the second and the third, and honestly, I'm just not a fan of the much broader and wider mouth of the third design, the second's mouth being sharper and more compressed, seeming more badass and robotic to boost its beefier design. So yeah, I prefer the second one. Still, in consideration of the first suit, I don't hate it just because of how it looks. I hate it because of the sheer movement restriction given by there weren't sufficient bends and dips in the suits to allow fluent movement like the future 2 suits, given by the suit actor stating that he felt stiff and awkward in the suit and couldn't bend his limbs properly, resulting in some of the worst looking Ultra fights of all time, with one fight truly unleashing the awkwardness of the first suit. That fight being against Ragon in episode 4. So, the fight consists of 2 actors in skin-tight suits. Surely that must mean an opportunity for a fight with greater conflict and martial art action, right? No. The fight against Ragon just shows how dreadfully made the first costume was, given that the stiff suits just make the actors unable to pull off any stylish fighting, yet with both costumes being tight, resulting in a painfully awkward mess, and with most of it just being some cheap, overly long grapples with no flips or anything fancy. I guess the writers tried to cover up the awkwardness of this fight with the fact that Ragon was carrying a nuclear bomb on his frill, so Ultraman was holding back to try and stop it from going off, but that still doesn't excuse this piss poor battle. If the fight is going to end up unnecessarily stiff and embarrassing, couldn't they have just brought back a better fitting monster from Ultra Q, like Gomez? A beefier and thicker made monster would surely have made the fight more entertaining, and would just make the fight as stiff feeling as a fight with a skinnier monster like Ragon. Ragon himself was a pretty odd choice for this episode with almost no plot being changed at all. With a bigger monster, why couldn't they have done that? Some fights are just generally lousy, with no explanation at all for how bad they are. My least favourite Ultra fight of all time being the first fight against Red King, which goes as follows. Ultraman arrives, Red King picks a boulder, Ultraman blows up boulder, Ultraman goes up and flips Red King dies. Just fucking majestic. Sometimes the limitations of the kaiju costumes making some fights underwhelming, if not completely embarrassing, such as when suit designers sacrifice the actor's arms or legs away to put a unique twist on the monster, only for the fight to be a slop, especially considering the first ever fight against Bimula, where the monster actor can't do anything to fight Ultraman, resulting in Ultraman having to pull off all the action, resulting in Bimula being ragdolled for the fight, making it anticlimactic and underwhelming. Some fights, however, if given the right quality, directing, environmental advantage and effects, are pulled off absolutely smashingly, such as the battle against Mephilas and the second alien Bolton, to which fights being extremely entertaining and memorable, either being a good amount of proper conflict, of some well done specifically directed moments like Ultraman and Mephilas' duel in the air, or special effects like Ultraman slicing Bolton in half with his blade, or using his iconic Specium Ray signature move. Long story short, fight scenes are entertaining and admirable, but some are poorly directed and awkward, others well made and memorable. Moving on. While Hayata may be at the centre of the show, it would be nothing without his loyal comrades at the Triple SP, with the show having 5 main characters in total, excluding Hayata himself. There's Captain Muramatsu, the team leader, and my second favourite character, proving himself to be a strong independent leader, planning and carrying out most of the Science Patrol's investigations and attacks on kaiju. He's a strong, cunning character, and I like him for that. Then there's Arashi, the hot-headed marksman of the team. While I sometimes find him to be relatively uninteresting, he's certainly a witty and straightforward character, and certainly has his moments, with his weapon skills boosting his confident, almost hot-headed ego, with this costing him greatly in one particular episode. The actor for Arashi would return for another role in the next Ultra series of Ultra 7 as Shigeru, proving how popular this character was. Then there's Mitsuhiro Ide, my personal favourite, the innocent cinnamon roll inventor and running gagger of the group. He's basically the heart of the crew, sporting some of the funniest and wackiest moments of the series, and overall just being a fun character. On some aspects, he's a bumbling idiot. He once put salt in Muramatsu's coffee for God's sake. On the other hand, he's an inventing genius, having created some of the Science Patrol's greatest weapons, such as the Mars Cannon in episode 17, and he's definitely not the bravest when confronting kaiju.
他的能量不会有问题吧？没关系，放心吧。 对了，那个最初出现的别打，要等到第2个出现了才是实体，到那个时候再攻击啊，对不对？
是的。
哎呀，我的宇宙语可不过关呢，这怎么办啊？
要是能交谈上就太好了。
好，麻烦帮个忙，把门给开一开啊，劳驾。怪物来了，救命啊！
Then there's Akiko Fuji, the Science Patrol radio and communicator operator and the only token female member. She's a decent character, but I personally think the show doesn't give her enough time to develop her character, and barely has any key moments like the rest of the crew. For the most part, she's just the radio communicator giving Muramatsu messages, or casually tagging along on adventures and having a couple of lines of unmemorable dialogue, which is a bit of a pity. I also find her close friendship with Hoshino, the little boy who tags along with the Science Patrol, to be a little forced at times, especially considering episode 4 where they both go to a resort. Speaking of which, Hoshino is the 5th main character of the show who can be summed up as the tag-along kid. Considering child actors, it's likely you'd know what to expect from Hoshino. He's an eager kid who tags along and friends with the Science Patrol, although getting recruited later in the series due to an unexpectedly brave act. Hoshino is actually a pretty decent character and even sometimes gives the show a little spirit. He's certainly eager, although a little too eager and rather uncaring in the earlier episodes, but later on he proves himself to be a well-mannered and rather intelligent kid. Easily the most bearable kid out of the Ultraman shows I've seen, although in some episodes his presence can seem a little unnecessary, but overall he's decent enough. So with the show traditionally centering around the Science Patrol, the show basically takes the form of a light-hearted mystery show, except instead of the clues leading to a killer, it instead leads to a Apart from the characters, I also love the action scenes the Triple S pupils off in the kaiju. Sometimes even find the attack scenes even more entertaining than the Ultraman fights. I just find the 60s explosions immensely satisfying, and they also tend to show off more of the kaiju and their behaviour.
来吧，来去等一等。
Unfortunately, Ultraman is undoubtedly a show that likes to reuse general effects and sound. I mean, if I had a quid for every time I heard this roar and this UFO sound, calculator error. Usually whenever I decide to sit down and watch an episode of the original Ultraman, it's rare that one passes by without me thinking, okay, this is a kid's show. I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, it's just that's how it is. If you couldn't tell by the amount of kids they put into this show, excluding Hoshino, such as in episode 6 where Hoshino spends the majority buggering with his friends that are at least 2 years younger than him, and in 5 seconds before the big explosion where Fuji and Hoshino have to babysit someone else's little bitchy brat, and don't get me started on the Monster Prince, don't. Regardless of the kids, none of the plots in the show can be considered well thought of and detailed. They're all pretty bare-boned and basic, therefore making a bunch of episodes underwhelming, no matter how much action and effects they pack into it. This is why I much prefer darker and more intelligently written Ultraman shows, like 7, Nexus and Leo, having taken note of older viewers and having much more intriguing plots and pacing, instead of simply relying on action, kaiju and running gags. This makes Ultraman a little tiresome to watch more than 2 episodes at a time, but in short bursts, it's great fun, despite not including great writing. I personally think it's a stack of cheesy, feel-good enjoyment. Maybe I'm letting nostalgia blind me just a little bit, I still think what I think. Still, speaking of plots, while each episode is undoubtedly different from each other, the main pattern you seem to notice on most of them just follows as Kaiju arrives, and the Science Patrol may attack it and end up unsuccessful. Science Patrol then investigate monster and possible lead, monster appears again, Science Patrol attack it again, and Ultraman comes in to save the day. Pretty basic stuff. And when I said most, I meant most, as there are undoubtedly episodes that break this chain, and usually end up as some of the most unique and intriguing episodes of the series, despite not always being the best. Such as the episodes with Alien Bolton, including a much larger tone of suspense and eeriness, making the episodes somewhat darker and more mysterious, or Brother from Another Planet, my personal favourite episode, that instead of introducing a mindless animal or evil villain, it instead introduces a mysterious alien figure claiming to be humanity's friend, pulling off rather suspicious acts throughout the episode, making the episode seem much more mysterious and intelligent than the others. Sure, the plot twist that Zarab was evil would have had anyone guessing it from a mile away by today's standards, but he was still a great villain. The fight scene was pretty lackluster, but the majority of the episode was unique and brilliant. The biggest example of an episode differing from the status quo being the Forbidden Words, not only for introducing Mephilas, by miles my favourite Ultraman villain, but for centering the episode around him and his scheming. Yes, I know I only gave the episode a 6 in my Ultramania review, but I'm still damn glad it exists, despite there being a major plot hole with Mephilas repeatedly bribing a single child. It's great to see the series go down a totally different path. Instead of centering around the Science Patrol, it instead focuses on Mephilas, and shows how he deceives the Triple SP and leaves them baffled while he continues his tests on the human will with Satoru.
Por que você não pode me dar a terra de presente? Afinal, eu estou lhe oferecendo a vida eterna na minha estrela, Satoru.
Oh, and the fight with Ultraman was fucking awesome, no doubt about that. Effects in the show for e.g. Tsuburaya standards are cheap average to pretty damn impressive, some effects being damn lousy and uninteresting, like some monsters just spraying whites from their mouths to symbolise fire. Others being intriguing and damn impressive, like Bolton's morphing and Noronga's invisible effects. For a show in the mid-60s, it's almost no wonder why the show got an award in effects, not to mention the model cities and buildings made for destruction, to which are mostly damn well detailed and diverse. It's almost a shame to see them get demolished by a couple of men in rubber suits. But how else were they to do it? Film the fights in a field? Some shots would look as though it would have been better to film at real locations, but then again, Tsuburaya-san said in his book, it would have been much easier for Iji to have gone to a real location and film it, but that's not the point. It's not about realism, it's about style. But what's the best aspect of Ultraman? What is most fans' and kids' favourite bit of it that keeps them coming for more? Well, that's easy. The Kaiju. The Kaiju are the absolute heart of the series. Monsters as big and small as long as you can squeeze an actor into that suit truly dominate the series, a lot even being more recognisable than Ultraman himself, and many going on to star in later Ultra series as well as keeping the exact same designs, as they were just as awesome looking enough in the original, easily giving the original series the greatest rogues gallery of the Ultra franchise, with monsters and aliens with their iconic designs, roars and behaviours making their appearances true eye candy. I mean, try watching this without getting chills. Okay, some kaiju are kinda lazy and sloppily designed, therefore mostly not appearing after the original, but even the suckish kaiju are entertaining at least. Ultra Q has a giant flower and puppet dragon. Try a giant mole monster that shoots flames from its gullet. Not interesting enough? How about a black and white Michael Jackson alien that can change size and has a shrinking ray as its weapon? Or a tombstone-shaped monster with its arms fused to its side as a result of a human space mutation and came back to Earth to seek revenge on those that abandoned him only to get corroded by a water cannon that acts like acid on its skin. Actually, that last one's actually kind of depressing. But, still, The Rogue Gallery is fucking awesome. So, the verdict on this series, I think, is an absolute marvel and revolution in television history. Truly taking some balls to make a show like this, given by how separated it was from the black, brown and greyness of our usual 60s show. Ultraman was a true inspiration for TV and cinema alike. Despite the show itself not really being brilliant, it's respectable as hell, with stitching together actors setting up plots and development, men in kaiju suits wrecking up miniature sets of the episode's location, and special effects, making Ultraman less of a simple TV show. It's a work of art, and a pretty damn good one at that. Sure, it's far from perfect, with some effects like miniature planes being flown on strings being completely outdated and embarrassing by today's standards. God knows what 60s viewers thought of it. It's basically Star Trek for Japan, as it was released on the same year, although I consider Ultra 7 to be more like Star Trek due to the more intelligent and science-fictional plots. Ultraman is a damn good start, and, of course, the spark that ignited the phenomenally large franchise that is the Ultra series. So, do I recommend this series? Absolutely. Given that it's technically a kids show, if you have a kid that's around 8 or under, this is an absolute must-buy. Just stay away from the English dub.
Captain, I think Fuji must be hearing voices inside her head.
Impossible.
Listen, even though Fuji is one of us, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that she's a girl, and they're very hard to figure out, aren't they?
Unless you're showing it to a kid that can't go with subs, to which I say, go for it, buddy. If you're an older viewer, you may want to give Ultraman a try and try something different, or appreciate effects of the 1960s, or if you're studying Japanese film, and appreciate the time and money pulled into this show, with the suit designs, building models, actors, and so forth. My verdict on Ultraman remains at an 8.5 out of 10. But that's just me. Go watch Ultraman, see what you think of it. It's not for everyone, but you've just got to appreciate it. And until next time, watch. Oh, and 2016 also marks the 50th anniversary of Ultraman. So, happy 50th, big guy.